Welcome to A Slob Comes Clean, the podcast. I am Dana K. White. I share my personal deslobification process. As I figure out ways to keep my own home under control, I share the truth about cleaning and organizing strategies that actually work in real life for real people, people who don't love cleaning and organizing. Thanks for joining me today. This is podcast number 446, and I am going to call it ADHD and the No Mess Decluttering Process with Megs Crawford. Okay, so this is an interview that I did with an ADHD coach. She'd had me on her podcast to talk about the No Mess Decluttering process and how well it works with the people that she works with and the reasons why she's a big fan of the process. And I was like, well, can you come on and talk about ADHD and why this No Mess Decluttering process is so effective for those who have ADHD? And she was all about it. And so she came on, and many of y'all have diagnosed me with ADHD. Thank you very much. I've never been officially diagnosed, but I do know, and I say with confidence, that this process works exceptionally well for those with ADHD because you have told me that. So many of you have. I mean, I get emails all the time that say, this is the only process that's ever worked for me because I have ADHD. So a couple of things that we talk about in this episode that have been rumbling around in my brain that also make me go, okay, maybe I do have some degree of these challenges, right? And that is, one of them is we talk about the tendency to push through at the expense of everything else, right? She talked about, getting so in the zone on working something that we don't stop to eat. We don't stop to drink water. We, are like, have to go to the bathroom and are like still just holding it because I got to finish this project or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. Right. I also think that's one of the things that, I talk a lot about. My method of working on my house was to block everything else out and do nothing else for an entire weekend. And of course, I wasn't actually decluttering, but I was just getting everything, great and perfect. And then I couldn't maintain that. Well, and then I had kids, and then it wasn't even possible for me to do that anymore. So as life continues to happen, it just made me go, oh, so that's a trait. Okay. The other one that was real interesting is she talks about this ability to pivot, which is a great thing, right? But it's made me think about, my husband and I would say this is one of our challenges in our communication is I'm always ready to pivot. I'm always ready to be like, okay, well, this is what we could do. Oh, you know what? Actually, we could do this. No, wait, actually, we could do this. Right. And sometimes he's like, whoa, hold on. I was just thinking about this one thing. We can't just pivot. And he says it nicer than that. But I find myself being like, what is the big deal? Let's just change and do that. And I went, oh, this is one of those differences between us. And so I think it's really powerful to kind of understand some of these things and to hear it from Meg. So I think you're going to enjoy this interview that I did with Megs on ADHD and the No Mess Decluttering process. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on, Megs. So I was on your podcast fairly recently. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about ADHD. We were talking about the no mess process. And I love that you have a lot of experience with it, and you have a lot of experience with ADHD, because this is going to come as a complete shock to you, I'm sure. But a lot of my audience tells me that they have ADHD. A lot of my audience actually tells me that I have ADHD, but I have never been diagnosed. So tell us what your background and expertise is in the area of ADHD.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm honored to be a guest on your podcast. I was diagnosed with ADHD almost 3 years ago now. And at that point in time, I was working in the corporate world, and I was working through my master's degree in project management. I had just gotten my certification. That was the path. I was going to climb the ladder in the corporate world. But for some reason, and now I know the path I'm on, it made sense to leave. And at one point, I started working with a career coach, and I wanted to do something so much more. Now, while I was getting my degree and also working through the corporate world, I was going through the process of decluttering my home and having a not so great time of it. but I have always been just a very messy person, which is why I related to your book so much. I'm like, oh, this woman is a genius. But I had been going through the process. So, of course, when I left the corporate world, I'm like, I'm going to be a professional organizer. That's what I wanted to do. And I had known a couple of friends doing it. And then, of course, the home edit was out. So, my goal was to become a professional organizer, putting together Pinterest perfect pantries, picture worthy spaces in your home that you could share with the world. I also decided to start a podcast around that time. You'll find we love to do all the things instead of just one thing. And I just found that as I started working with people, and most of my clients tended to be people with ADHD, that the Pinterest perfect pantries idea that I had was not going to work for people with ADHD, not at least at first. And when I first went into homes expecting that I would be able to organize for people, I quickly found out that without working one-on-one with people, then I would lose out on really helping people make a difference in their home. And so what I found for myself is that as far as the clutter goes, it's so incredibly overwhelming. And we look at it as this one whole clutter. It's not like all of these individual items that we're going to take here and there and all of this other stuff. But ultimately, it's this one big clutter, and it's hard to know where to start. And so the way that I got started in my journey with organizing is starting my podcast and interviewed literally anyone who would talk to me about ADHD and organizing. I probably read about 15 books leading up to my journey into organizing, yours being one of them. Of course, being well versed in the Marie Kondo method and looking into the home edit, all of these different versions of decluttering and letting go. And I am at the point where I'm at now. So I am a coach for women with ADHD who want to let go in their home. And it's really just about learning how your brain works so that you can work with it instead of against it. And I'll give you more specifics, but that's me in a nutshell to start.
Right. And I think that's fantastic. And I think that we all relate to that. Oh, this is something I'm into. How can I turn it into something more? Like, I feel like that is such a thing that we have in common, like we want to expand it, make it bigger, do even more. So I love hearing your story of how you've done that. So when we talked before, we talked about the no mess process, right? From decluttering at the speed of life. So you talked about how it works really well with ADHD. And the thing that I hear from people, I was just telling you before we started recording, but I get 2 different emails consistently from people. And some of them will say, and these are the fewer ones, honestly, will say, I can't do the take it there now method because I have ADHD and I will get distracted and I'll never finish. Right. And then I get a lot more emails from people who say, I have to do the take it there now method. It's the only one that works for me because I have ADHD. And the difference between those 2 emails, honestly, is the people who've tried it, right? But because I am not an ADHD expert, I know from what I've heard from people and what people tell me again and again and again. I have worked, and hopefully it's coming out really soon. We have a professional development course for mental health professionals who work with ADHD clients, specifically about why this method works so well. But I want to hear it from you. Like, how does the take it there now? Why is that an effective method for those with ADHD?
Oh, absolutely. So, if you set something down and you don't put it away, you have now procrastinated doing what you need to do. The thought of you coming back to that today to put it away, non-existent. It's not going to happen because what happens in our brain is we follow the breadcrumbs, right? So like I start in my kitchen and I start to fiddle around with the towels and I decide, oh, I need to start a load of laundry. And so I go to start a load of laundry. And from there, I notice that there's clean laundry. So I get a basket and I bring it to my room and I'm like, now's the time that I need to fold my laundry, except that then I hear the dogs barking. So I go to what the dogs are barking at, so on and so on and so forth. So I'm following this trail of breadcrumbs. Now, there's a lot of different things that could happen here. You could write it down. Maybe you could set a reminder in your phone, but that's creating more work than just putting it away right now. So, what I would say to the people who have ADHD and that method is seemingly not working for them right now, I would say a couple things. So, first off, you know what's best for you in the moment. And it could be that they're not ready to challenge the status quo. And what I mean by that is we are inundated with so much information on social media, on YouTube, TikTok, so on and so forth, with so many people out there saying that, well, I have ADHD, I can't do that. Well, I have ADHD, that's the only thing that will work for me. But what's wrong with that, and the difficulty with that, is that we're all still different. We're all still individual people where we have to figure out what works for us. And we hate it when we're not good at something right away. So, like trying a new technology or, for example, organizing. I can't tell you how many times I organized a space and then I would fail. And I would be like, why would I even bother trying this again? But I was so determined. And the truth is that every time I went at it, I would build this foundation where I continued to learn more and more about what I needed to do to stay organized. Part of it was just having less, which was key in my case. But we hate it when we're not good at something right away. It doesn't bring us the dopamine that we feel. In fact, it brings us like anxiety and yucky feelings because we don't like not being good at something right away. So if you're taking something and you get distracted by something else, that's okay, because that happens sometimes. That's the nature of our brain. We have an interest-based nervous system. And so we're going to follow the breadcrumbs where they lead us. But what we do with ADHD and what I lead my clients to do is start to establish some rules for yourself. If you are going to declutter your home or even just picking up or putting things away, put blinders on. You have those figurative blinders on like a horse would. And you're like, you look at the item and you're like, I'm going to take this item and I'm going to put it where it goes. Right. And if it doesn't have a home, asking yourself that question, where would I go to look for this if I were trying to find it? And part of it is just trying to take a step back. But to that point as well, we get dysregulated very easily. And when we're in a state of dysregulation, it's hard to stop to ask ourselves those questions that we need to ask in order for things to have a home.
Can you explain what you mean by dysregulation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example and a story. So dysregulation, not being a doctor, but let me tell you how it looks like for me. My husband was gone the other weekend. He had this incredible event in Florida, which meant that I was going to be home with the kids by myself. Now, on one hand, this is a great opportunity for me to relax with the kids and make some memories. But for some reason, I was so uncomfortable with him being gone and didn't take a step back to take care of myself, but instead immersed myself in a garage project. I was like, today is the day that, we're just going to move some things around. We're going to get some more stuff out of the house. And I was probably in the garage for about 4 or 5 hours working without taking a bathroom break, taking a drink of water. And I saw the car wash. And I was like, oh, I think now is the best time to wash the car. And in the back of my mind, my brain was like, don't do that right now, Megan. You're really tired. And that's exactly what I did. I went and washed the car. So of course, now the garage is clean. The car is washed, but I am exhausted and I'm overwhelmed and I'm getting shorter with my kids and I'm not the best version of myself. So a state of dysregulation is just when you're go, 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 constantly picking up the next breadcrumb and getting it done until you literally can't function anymore. That's part of why, I don't know if you've ever heard of this in the ADHD community. They're like, don't sit down. Just don't sit down and then you'll be able to get everything done. And I'm like, yes, that can be true, right? But that's a state of dysregulation that we're in. And if you're interested in more about the regulation aspect of things, I really highly recommend ADHD with Jenna Free. She's a therapist out of Canada, and she talks about regulation with ADHD. And I interviewed her on the podcast too. It's fascinating stuff.
Well, and I I see that as the all or nothing mentality. It's like,
Yeah.
I can't stop, but the beauty to me, the reason I need to use the no mess process, only progress, is that it allows me to stop at any moment, because when I would try to push through and then fail, it felt like, okay, I gave it literally everything I have and I failed. And that just made it so hard to ever start again in the future to do, to do
Yeah.
any of that. So I think that the other thing you were talking about earlier, as far as it was just making me think about, it's really important to me to do the non-committal experimentation, right? Like allowing myself to experiment, allowing myself to try, which goes against that feeling of, oh no, I'm not good at it, right? Like because I'm like, you know what, I'm just trying it, I'm just seeing if it works, I'm seeing if this is something that will work for me, and that having that mentality gives me the permission to give it a shot, right?
Yeah. Like it's just giving ourselves permission
Mm-hmm.
to try it, but just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think about, oh my gosh, Atomic Habits all the time with James Clear. And some of that book truly resonated with me. Some of it didn't. But one thing he said is talking about 1% changes every single day. And what's that 1% change that you can make to make a difference? But it doesn't feel like you're making a difference right now. But we do have that all or nothing mentality. People with ADHD know what the end result looks like. We just want that organized space. But the thing is that it can't be done in a weekend. It can't be done even in a month. And that's why so many of the programs out there are so long. Like I think you have a program for a year, isn't it? Maybe I,
We have the Take Your House Back course, which you have it, but people have been in it for years, and yeah,
yeah.
but you have a year at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? But
Mm-hmm.
that's really the expectation that you should go in with. But that is so overwhelming in itself. Like, first, I'm not good at this. Second, I know I want to get it done this weekend. And third, you're telling me that it's going to take a year. Why would I even start?
Right.
And so it's that kind of mentality that holds us back from making that progress and seeing just a little bit at a time versus doing it all at once.
So talk about the importance, the goal that I encourage people to make is to have less, like make this space better. Specifically those with ADHD, how does an excess of stuff contribute to the struggles that they have, due to the ADHD? I don't know if that's the right way to say it or not, but
Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
perfect. Yeah. So ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And
Mhm.
so oftentimes the hyperactivity is happening up here. And so our brains work faster than normal, which means that we're thinking about one thing and then we're on to the next thing. And sometimes it's fun to kind of trace it back. Like, how did I get there from there? There's so many different ways, and we bounce and we bounce and we bounce. Sometimes it's anxiety ridden. Sometimes it's you're going on a doom train down into like just beating yourself up for no darn reason. But that is what your brain looks like on the surface inside. When you think about your physical stuff, it's a representation of what's going on up here. It's a physical representation, which means that it's going to distract, it's going to overwhelm, and it's going to create shame in a way that doesn't support us. I gave a presentation the other day about how clutter can actually inspire. And I thought that was interesting. And I got to thinking about it more. I'm like, yeah, but at what level? Like, at what level is the clutter still inspiring versus taking away from, who you are as a person? What I found for me is that the level of clutter I had distracted me everywhere I went. When I would make dinner, there was clutter that was beckoning me, saying, you need to do something about this. When I would put my kids to bed at night, there was clutter that was telling me, you need to do something about it. But it was something that was constantly on my mind and constantly being procrastinated. And so it just creates an additional level of overwhelm. I also believe that people with ADHD can be organized, but we've just never been taught in a way that works for our brains. We've just been taught that, hey, it's great to have less. Try it.
Well, I think, one of the things I always tell people is that the people who are saying, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who will say, you can't function in clutter. And the reality is, I can absolutely function in clutter. And that's part of my problem, right? Like, there are a lot of people who are like, before I can do this thing, I have to clear the clutter. And I occasionally wish that I was that way, except that the clutter never even occurs to me. I throw myself in and I can function great inside of clutter until all of a sudden I can't. And it hits this moment where, okay, now it's too much. Now I'm overwhelmed. And then that's why I had to come up with this process, was to work through that feeling of being overwhelmed, because I would just be completely stopped from doing anything. So I had to figure out how to get started. Right. But I feel like that's part of the miscommunication from the people who are naturally organized to the person who is naturally lots of stuff, is that we're talking about two different things. Like, yes, it is definitely helpful to have the clutter be gone, but it's the reason we don't understand where they're coming from is that we're not the same. We are able to go ahead and think and function with a bunch of stuff around.
Yeah. I love to tell the story about angry cleaning. Have you ever angry cleaned before?
I mean, it's happened, but I'm not a huge angry cleaner, but I definitely, I've cleaned it with a bad attitude for sure.
Yeah. So I used to be an angry cleaner, and I think this was about a year and a half ago, I started to angry clean. I was down on the floor scrubbing the floorboards because I got to the point that I was so overwhelmed with the stuff that I just didn't know how to contain myself. And that's a state of dysregulation. Like, my nervous system was in fight or flight and I was in fight. But I took a step back, and it was through all the work that I had been doing. And I looked at everything on the counter and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, we have no systems in place for any of this. We have no like regular routine where we clean up this or do that. So, like, how could I possibly be angry at anyone else in this house, including myself? This is just the way that we've been living because we're following the breadcrumbs. We're living life kind of without a plan, the way that we were taught how. Now, in order for us to change things, we have to consciously make a change. We can't follow the breadcrumbs anymore. We've got to stop ourselves and start to learn new aspects about living and how to put things away, and putting things away by creating homes at the same time and understanding that it can't all be done at once, which again is so frustrating. But I do find that that's so fascinating because so many of my clients are like, I'm just so done being overwhelmed. But at that point, because you're so right, it is like, we can function with clutter. It doesn't mean that we're not full of anxiety. It doesn't mean that it doesn't bother us. It's just that it's so easy to ignore it and put blinders on until someone's coming over, right?
Yes.
And then you're like, now I'm so aware of my clutter. I can't believe it. And then there's so much shame because how could we be living this life where we haven't done anything about it? Now someone's coming over. They're going to see us. They're going to see who we really are. It's a state of chaos, and chaos stands for can't have anyone over syndrome. Which is, something I suffered from for so long. And it's fascinating.
What have you found from the 5-step process works the best with your clients?
Oh my gosh. I love the question. I talk about this on my podcast all the time. I am shouting your book from the rooftops is, if you are going to look for this item, where would you go first? And I love the way that you describe it in your book, and the way that you explain that it's two different parts of our brain, right? The way that where you would go to look for something is totally different than where you would go to put it away. Because with can't have anyone over syndrome, if you're trying to get things ready for people to come over, you're not looking for homes for things. You're not decluttering. Right. You're not being purposeful. You're just putting stuff away and trying to get it out of sight so that you can have clear countertops, so that you can create this illusion of what this house is, right? But I love using this with my clients because it starts to help establish the homes for things. I talked to another ADHD decluttering coach. She has autism as well. She was telling me a story about her grandmother who bought these amazing pair of scissors for sewing. And they were so sharp, she didn't want anyone else to use them. So she hid them. And then she couldn't find them. So she searched high and low. She searched everywhere for these scissors. And then she went shopping to get herself a new pair of scissors and went to go hide them again and found the original pair of scissors. So it's just so fascinating the way that our brain works. And we love to overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
Instead of keeping it simple. And so that's the one question I even make. Some of my clients will try to give me an answer and I can tell that they're just trying to give me an answer.
Yep.
So I'm like, you close your eyes, and I want you to think you don't have this in your hand right now. Where are you going to go look for it? And it's fascinating how the answer changes. And I think what's really neat about this too is that with ADHD, organizing doesn't have to be where you think it should go. It gets to be what makes the most sense for you. Like I have another client who keeps work clothes in the dining room in one of those like Tupperware things because that made the most sense for getting ready in the morning because they didn't want to wake up their significant other upstairs. And it has created so much less stress for them to keep that in that space. But they know where everything is. It's just so neat how you get to decide what organizing means to you instead of looking at Pinterest. I mean, you can get ideas still, but.
Well, yeah. And I do think that there's so much of that comes from having not felt successful in this area in the past. And so you don't trust yourself. You know, that's what I hear from a lot of people is they're like, but I don't know where I would look for it first. And I'm like, let's be clear. We're not saying where would it be? Because that's what it feels like I should be asking. It's like, no, you really don't know. That's actually the answer we're going for is where is the first place where you would go looking for it at the beginning of what you assume is this long, search for it. But it's that learning to trust ourselves. Like it becomes something that every time you do find something in the first place where you look for it, it's a bigger deal when you have struggled your whole life with clutter, right? Than it would be for somebody who's like, well, of course, I put it away. So now it's there. No, I mean, like actually finding things in the first place changes how you feel about your house, how you feel about your stuff, how you feel about yourself. And then the next time I'm more and more excited and it becomes easier and easier and easier, even though it was always instinct. It was never a decision I had to figure out, but still trusting that instinct becomes quicker and easier for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think to that point too, the one time it doesn't work is I've worked with a couple people in their bigger homes, right, for longer periods of time, is if we do have to switch things around. If we are trying to make more sense of the space and we're actually having to move things. And it's hilarious because I'll ask them that question. They'll be like, well, in the drawer that we just put all the cat food in. And I'm like, so I think
I always say, if you're trying to clear out this space, because people will say, they love to say, well, I would look for the screwdriver on my coffee table. And I'm like, okay, but that's not our goal, right? Like our goal is for the coffee table to be clear. So if the coffee table is clear, then where would you look for it first? So you have to take that space out of the equation. But I think that gets easier the less stuff that you have and the more that you've trusted yourself and you have an awareness of what you have and where it is, then you are at a point where you'll be able to switch things around more easily because you're not having to constantly try to remember all the things.
Exactly. To that point, I will say most of my clients have about 15 hobbies that I learned within the first couple of sessions. And a lot of those hobbies aren't being done because they're in unclear spaces. They don't know where to go to get them. And if they were to get it out to use them, it's harder to put away because it doesn't really have a clearly defined home. And for our creative brains where we love to do everything, what are those hobbies? What are those things? And, coming back to like a vision, what is the vision for the space? What do you actually want in this space? And it helps to make those decisions to let go and to have less and just to make sense of it all.
Yeah. And also clear space to do the things. Because it's, if I'm wanting to quilt, that actually requires a lot of empty space.
Yeah.
Where nothing is being stored. Because if you think about if I'm making a queen size quilt, that's the amount of space that I need with nothing else in it so that I can work on this queen size. I'm not a quilter, so maybe you do it other ways, but in my mind, that's what I imagine. You do, but you
Yeah.
need space to do art, to do projects, to do things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will say, something about the ADHD brain I find fascinating is our working memory. So, like, we know what we're doing in the moment and here and now, and I could pull things out of the archives of my brain. But there's some things that we're not reminded of on a regular basis. And so, like our hobbies, for example, we forget what we're really excited about if it's not right in front of us, right? It's like it's got to be out in front of us or it's not existent. And so I keep a list of all the things I like to do on my refrigerator now so that I'm like, oh, I know that I like to do this. Maybe I do have time for this, right? But it's creating different things like that that can help inspire you and remind you why you're letting go of the things that aren't as inspiring in the moment as well. But I find that working memory is so fascinating, even with my clients who've been working with me for a long time will forget how much progress they've made. So, coming back to the progress aspect, that's why we love the results right away because it gives us that dopamine hit right away.
Mm-hmm.
But the progress, it's not as much. And then we forget how far we've come. And so that's why I love like working with you or any of your decluttering coaches, why I recommend it so much because we can remind you of that. We help remind you how far you've come, the foundation that you've built, the things that you now know, because there will come a point where you hit a dip and you start to doubt yourself again. You don't believe that that's a real possibility to be decluttered in your home. And that's where we come in. We're like, yes, you can. We're living proof and we're guiding you through the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Bringing them back to what they already know, reminding them and keeping them on track. I think that's such the power of this. So, well, thank
So
you
cool.
so much for this. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that you wanted to cover before we wrap it up?
Yeah, well, I was thinking as we were talking, you wanted me to come on to talk about more of the ADHD terms. And one thing that I will say is when you think about the larger project, we have trouble with executive function. And executive function means taking that large project and breaking it up into the smallest imaginable tasks possible, things that are bite sized, things that we can do in 5, 10, or 15 minutes, and focusing on that versus trying to do it all in a day. So that's what I love about your method as well, because, starting with the trash and saying, oh, well, if I just go through and gather all the trash, that's one thing that I've done. And now I can check it off the list. And we love being able to check things off lists and say that I've done this. And I'm capable of doing more, but that's one thing that I know I've done. And then I can move on and get to the next level and to the next level. So I love the way that you have it spelled out and is a very clear process for people to follow because it makes it easy. And I think that that's where a lot of people with ADHD get stuck is that even if they do make progress, they get stuck because they're like, now what? I don't know what I did. And so now how do I go about this again? And so thank you for your method, whether it's for a neurotypical brain or an ADHD brain or anyone out there. I think that it's so helpful. And for those who have said that, it doesn't work for them, maybe try it again. How many times did you try it before it didn't work for you? And from there, did you ask yourself, where did I go wrong? And what didn't work for me? Have you evaluated that? Because those are the questions we need to be asking ourselves as we're going through this process. And everyone's going to be a little bit different. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to figure out what does work for you. And the real only way to do that is actually taking the action and going through it. And most of the time when people say, they're not saying it didn't work for them, they're saying it wouldn't work for them. They're predicting how it would go. And I am familiar with that because that is how I roll, right? Like I wanted to have the plan that took me all the way from everything being out and disastrous to everything being perfection. And I wanted to know exactly how that plan was going to go. And I put so much time and mental energy into the plan without actually doing anything. And used up all my energy just on the plan, and then it didn't get me anywhere. And then also when I would try that plan and it didn't go perfectly, then I would give up.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fun. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my website is mindfulmegs.com, and you can find my podcast there too. It's Organizing an ADHD Brain. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Yeah, and check me out there. You can find all my socials there as well. Thank you so much for having me on. I told you this before, but I'm like, I can't believe I'm on your podcast. I love you so much. And I just admire you so much for all the work you've done.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving us the terms and the understanding of what it is that's going on in the brain that makes it a challenge, but also now we understand what those challenges are so we can tackle them. So,
Heck yeah.
Wasn't that fun? Yeah, you can find links to Meg in the show notes. And of course, the No Mess Decluttering process is in great detail in Decluttering at the Speed of Life. And don't forget that my newest book is now out there for you to read it or listen to it. And don't forget, if you would like to have somebody guide you through this process, I have decluttering coaches at declutteringcoaches.com. Those are all trained and certified decluttering coaches, trained and certified by me in the no mess process. So go find them there. All right. I'll talk to y'all next week. Bye.